Alright, this is John Colo with DiscountJuicers.com. Today we have another exciting episode for you. Today we have a special guest, Kaelash from the Vital Influence Portal. And he's here to share with you guys his top 10 tips for successful vacuum blending. I consider Kaelash the blending master. I call myself a juicing master. But Kaelash blends far more than me. Back in the day, he would actually blend 1 to even 3 times a day and still drinks actually smoothies, actually this trip, 2 to 3 times a day, sometimes even more. So Kaelash, really briefly, you want to give people a little bit about your background, how you got into blending, and then we're just going to go ahead and then get into the tips.
I got into blending in the early 90s, actually. I just loved to experiment, blending different things together. I don't know, it's like a passion, you know? Once I discovered my parents' blender and just put things together, and sometimes they tasted great, sometimes they didn't. I have to admit, I had to sometimes throw things into compost because it tasted so bad. And then over the years, I kind of developed a sense of how to put things together in the right order so they would taste great. And then I started teaching this to thousands of people, and I still blend, continuing to blend. So it's definitely a passion of mine. I love making salads. I love making blended salads, and I love making smoothies. And even when I juice, actually, I do have a juicer, but I tend to use my blender to juice my juices in the blender.
Wow, so he makes vacuum juices. Links down below to my videos on how to make a vacuum blended antioxidant green juice in the vacuum blender, which actually, honestly, as long as I've been selling juices, I'll tell you guys, making a vacuum blended juice is far superior than even the best slow juicer because, number one, you basically open up more cell walls than a juicer can. Number two, you're doing it in an oxygen-deprived environment, which no juicer can presently do other than maybe a commercial juicer that I'm aware about.
And it's faster. It's easier to clean the machine.
Easier to clean. I'll give Kaelash the easier to clean. Makes a higher quality juice and a higher nutrient juice, although not everything can be vacuum juiced easily, especially if they're like straight carrots. You can't easily vacuum juice them. But nonetheless, the other thing I really wanted to share about Kaelash is that he came from using like a standard osterizer blender with like the beehive shape that really he had big problems with. He then upgraded into the Vitamix, which was the next level, and now he's actually using vacuum blending. And I know a lot of you guys may not be familiar with the vacuum blending, but really simply what vacuum blending is, you basically suck the excess oxygen out of the carafe. This is the New Wave Moxie. Link down below to my Amazon shop where you guys can purchase this. This will soon be discontinued, although this is an entry-level model. Of course, we have a Vitamix here. Any legacy Vitamix model, you can buy the Void Systems Kit, which includes the carafe and the lid, so you can now vacuum blend with your Vitamix. Link down below to my video on that. And of course, if you're lucky enough to have a BlendTech blender, you guys could just buy this lid to fit on any BlendTech 4-side or a wild side carafe. And make sure you guys use the coupon code DJ25 at voidsystems.com. We'll put a link down below. You guys could save $25 off so that you could upgrade to vacuum blending. And vacuum blending is a little bit different. So Kaelash, you want to share your experience with going from an osterizer style blender to like a Vitamix, and then now to vacuum blending?
Well, the osterizer style, it's so difficult. It's like a funnel. The blades are there at the bottom, and the food, unless you cut it really small, it doesn't even go down to where the blades are. It's kind of just sitting there on top, and the blades are just spinning empty. That's my experience. So I had to cut things smaller to go down to the blades, and then usually I had to add water, and then turn the blender on, and then you see like the same piece several times, and maybe it'll go down, and at best the blades would hit it. It was just so frustrating. And then I often had to open it and shake it and do all kinds of things. And that was all solved when I got the Vitamix blender, and everything just got sucked down and everything was blended. It came out so smooth. I loved the texture of the Vitamix blended food. But then when I learned about vacuum blending, it's like a whole nother level, and just the texture, the flavor, food lasting so much longer. I would not go back to. I still have my Vitamix, but I use the the craft that fits on the Vitamix, and I do all my blending now in the vacuum blender exclusively. I always use that vacuum blender. So it's been 2018 I started vacuum blending, and I'm not going back to regular blending.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Nate says once you go vac, you don't go back. So the other thing with the vacuum blender is you literally have to suck the oxygen out of the craft. So that means you can't put a tamper in to tamp things down. I mean, that's why many people like the Vitamix. I mean, if you have a blend tech, then you've never been able to really use a tamper in the blend tech. But if you have a Vitamix, you could make really thick mixtures and just tamp it in there. I mean, it gets really loud and noisy, and then you got to clean the tamper. And if you don't put the lid on before you put the tamper in, you could break the tamper plastic into the blender, which I've done before, and I know many people have done. But so when you go vacuum blending, you have to adopt some new techniques. So as Kaelash is a blending master for over like going on 30 years now of blending, maybe even longer.
Even longer.
Even longer. You know, he's had to deal with the osterizer, make sure he could blend successfully in that. Then he moved up to the Vitamix, and then when he moved to vacuum blending, he had to adjust his blending techniques so that he could successfully vacuum blend. And that's what he is going to share with you guys in this episode today.
Yes, so I used the Vitamix, and I was so used to using the tamper, or plunger as some people call it, and then I realized, well, if I want to vacuum blend, I can't use it. And the transition was not too difficult, but we want to give you those tips so that you can learn more quickly and you don't have to make some of the same mistakes that we made. And so tip number one is to layer things properly. And in other words, you can't just throw things in there. You don't have the tamper. You can't just push things down into the blades. I mean, even with the traditional blending, there was a layering. But if you didn't follow it, you could always push it down with a tamper, which you can't with these vacuum blenders. So I'll talk about 3 layers. The first layer, so on the bottom, what you put in first are the more liquidy things. If you use water, you could use water or coconut water or juice or juicy fruits. So sometimes if I make a blended salad, for example, I'd rather not put any water in there, and maybe I put some juice, but first I'm going to see which vegetables can I put in there that are water rich, that have a high water content. And so I'd go for cucumbers, for example, or bell peppers. Sure, you could use an apple. You could use tomatoes if you do tomatoes. So first the juicier things, and then the next layer are the harder things. Second layer, the harder things. So I almost always put turmeric in my blended salads and smoothies, as well as ginger. So I put that. Next layer, if I have nuts or seeds, which I typically also put, like chia or flax or almonds or macadamia nuts, any of the harder things, I'd also put in that second layer. Or clove, I like to add some clove for the antioxidants. So anything that's harder would be second. And then third, this I learned even before I vacuum blended, the greens should not be over blended. If you over blend greens, they kind of turn bitter and you lose a lot of nutrients. Sure, you lose less when you vacuum blend, but still I would recommend putting the greens on top. So again, liquids or liquidy foods first, second, the hard ingredients, and third, the greens.
Wonderful, Kaelash. I mean, that's pretty much the same techniques I use as well. Always put liquids in first, and then like I'll just blend up a pound of tomatoes, for example, instead of adding liquids, and then I'll put all my greens on top and my nuts and seeds and other herbs and spices. All right, Kaelash, so what is tip number 2?
Tip number 2, if you were to add any powders like cinnamon or some kind of green powder or maca, whatever it is, do not add that on top, because the pump might suck it into the pump. It could break or damage the pump. So powders, I would put either at the beginning, or I would put the powders with the hard ingredients, as we talked about in tip number 1.
So what are some of the powders you like to use in your smoothies, Kaelash?
I use Vitamineral Green from Health Force. I use that sometimes. Like I mentioned, cinnamon, carob as well. Maca I use sometimes. Those are the main ones that I use. I've used moringa as well. Moringa, I've used wheatgrass powder. or spirulina. There's the blue spirulina, I like that a lot. So that's another one. How about you?
Yeah, so I use like things like the blue spirulina, the chlorella powder, the regular green spirulina. I use like different like green powders. I use actually berry powders is one of my favorite things to do. So I've been using a lot of black raspberry powder lately. I have other different kind of elderberry powders, and I have all different kinds of fruit powders. And then another thing I really love is actually powdered probiotics. So I get these like spore-based probiotics that I'll add in there to different mixtures. Sometimes also add like powdered L-reuteri probiotic. But also more importantly for me is I'll actually add prebiotic fibers. So I have different fiber supplements, like fructooleosaccharides, FOS, inulin. I have all different kinds of acacia fibers, like a fiber blend mix with like banana fiber, resistant starch, all kinds of crazy things. I do also vanilla powder. I'll do maca. I'll do actually the carrot powder. Actually, I love carrot powder. And then another one I love to do is the mesquite powder.
Oh yes.
I love that. I found a really cool guy that makes mesquite powder. Like it's super sweet, super tasty. Oh, and another powder I'll use. I'd rather use dates, but sometimes I get lazy and I just put in date powder because it blends a little bit different texture and tastes a little bit different than using whole dates, which sometimes like don't get ground up all the way. So yeah, I mean, I just use a whole bunch of different powders, whether it's fruit powders or vegetable powders, which is primarily what I use, or the fiber powders. Yeah, I'd encourage people to add powders. I mean, I don't personally use protein powders. If you guys did want to use protein powders, I actually would advise you against it because I don't like isolated protein powders. But if you wanted to use a protein powder, I would recommend this stuff called lentine powder, which is actually dehydrated duckweed powder, which is a food. Also, you could add things like spirulina powder or chlorella powder, which actually have a lot of protein in it, but it is a whole food and comes with more than just the protein. There's been a lot of incidences with protein powders being contamination with heavy metals and things because they're basically isolating a food. I mean, of course, you could also add, ground up flax seeds or hemp seeds, or even just, I mean, if you wanted protein, just add peas. I mean, they got pea protein powder. Just add frozen peas to your mixture to get the protein from the peas plus the fiber and all the other nutrients in peas.
I remember one more. I've used acai powder.
Oh, yeah, of course. I use acai powder. I have maqui berry powder. I mean, I could go down the list, but basically, I usually like to use berry powders and green powders as well as fiber powders, probiotic fiber powders, and also, just unique food powders that I wouldn't necessarily eat otherwise.
So remember, do not put those powders last.
Yes.
Put them first or somewhere in the middle.
Because I have put them last. Oh, and then I also actually use, so when I make my soups, I'll use like Frontier organic spices, and a lot of those are the powders. So I'll use like the taco seasoning powder. I'll use the fajita seasoning powder. I like the curry powder, right? And when I make my blended soups or salad dressings, I mean, sometimes I don't follow Kaelash's directions. I put them in the last, and then they get sucked in to the pump, and it's definitely not a fun thing to do. So yeah, don't put them in last like me. Follow the experts' recommendations. So Kaelash, what is tip number 3 for successful vacuum blending?
Number 3 is add enough liquids or water-rich foods. Again, like we mentioned in 1, you don't have a tamper. You can't just push things down. So some recipes actually, I would say, are even impossible to make because some things, if you want something extremely thick, if you put just nuts in, well, some nuts it would be possible.
Some nuts, yeah, I do make 100% macadamia nut butter, like in a square craft, just like that in the Blend Tech wrap. I put a whole bunch, and you got to pulse it, and then because the macadamia nuts have high fat content, it instantly turns into like a liquid pretty easily, and then it's just like it's a creamiest macadamia nut butter you ever made.
Yeah, I've made that before, so I take that back. Some nuts,
most nuts you can't do it alone. Yes, most nuts.
Yeah, so for most things you need to have, for most things you'll blend, you need to have enough liquids, and like we mentioned before, put those first into the blender.
I guess it could be liquids or high oil content with less fiber. So for example, if you want to make almond butter wouldn't really work, but if you put almonds and then you poured in some almond oil or coconut oil, you could do that. But what I prefer to do is I'll put a whole bunch of macadamia nuts, get it into a liquid first, and then I'll add a percentage of almonds to the macadamia nut butter liquid, and then I'll blend it in. So then I'll have a blend of mac nuts and almonds, which actually also tastes really good.
Nice.
All right, Kaelash, so what is tip number 4 for successful vacuum blending?
Tip number 4 is do not overfill your blender. Some of them have a line like this one here.
It says maximum capacity.
Do I always follow it?
No.
Sometimes the spinach, especially the greens, might be a little bit over the line, but that's okay. It depends a little bit on what you blend as well. But I've had some trouble, sometimes the food getting sucked up into this piece that prevents food from going into the valve, but it still got in and some liquids. And so actually the liquids could be a real problem. They have ruined the pump in some people's blenders that I know. And then the whole blender you could not use anymore. So do not overfill your blender is tip number 4.
I want to comment on that, like don't overfill your vacuum blender. This is so important. I mean, something like the void lid actually will suck the liquid through the vacuum blender, which can and does happen. So it's very important not to overfill it too much. And what I'm going to say is that if you're blending something really thin, then you definitely want to have it lower in the carafe. If it's thicker and not going to tend to bounce up into the lid, then you can do it a little bit higher. Now, the unique thing about the void systems solution is that it will maintain the vacuum during the blend. There's no other system on the market that I'm aware of that can do this automatically, although you could maybe do it with like the Tri-Best blender. You could keep the pump on top, hit the vacuum button, have it continue to vacuum when you're blending, because that could actually help remove oxygen that's released from the produce as it's being blended. And should there be any leak, it'll compensate and keep the air out. Because I have had vacuum blenders such as this one that you'll blend, and by the time you're done blending, somehow there's a leak in the gasket, and then you undo it, and there's like no vacuum, comes in, no air comes back in. I'm like, oh man, I just used my vacuum blender to not vacuum blend, which actually I really don't like.
Yeah, no, that's frustrating. It's happened to me. Like I did all this work, I cut everything, I blended, and then I opened the valve, and I realized that I just blended it the regular way.
Right, yeah, maybe some leaf got stuck in there, the seal's not right or whatever. But yeah, the void system has been basically designed so that actually you could run water through it to fully clean it out should you get any liquid in there accidentally. And this of course can also be taken apart and cleaned. That being said, make sure you screw that piece in really tight, because I've also had to drop into my blender blades and then actually put plastic into my blended mixtures on multiple occasions, which is definitely not fun. So that's why I'm not the biggest fan of this new wave solution.
At best, you had plastic in your food. What I've seen somebody do, or for somebody I know, it dropped into the food. So of course the food had to go in the garbage, not compost, because plastic. It also bent the blades.
Oh my gosh!
It chewed up the part, and it also broke the
motor.
Yes.
Oh my gosh!
The whole machine
was
useless.
Toast.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, new wave, it's inexpensive, but it's got some challenges there.
But if you tighten the part on top every time before you blend, it's not happened to me. I've been using this for many years, and it's never happened to me. But I always make sure I tighten it before I put the lid on.
Yeah, so you gotta be real careful.
Yeah.
All right, Kaelash, so what is tip number 5?
Number 5 is to cut things pretty small. You need to cut things smaller. Then, well, if you do a smoothie, maybe not necessarily. If you add quite a bit of water or coconut water, whatever liquid you use, but especially in my experience making blended salads or making thick soups, you need to cut things smaller, especially the greens. Like I use a lot the sunflower, those microgreens, some people call them sprouts, and so if I leave them whole and I stuff a lot on top, or even spinach, it kind of doesn't come down to where everything else is moving. So I have to cut things smaller than usually. Also, even on the bottom, some of the vegetables, when I used the tamper, the Vitamix, I could just push everything down. But I learned that it's better to cut things small. This way you don't have to open and close it and then pump again a second or third time.
Yeah, I mean, I would also agree. I mean, if I'm like blending tomatoes at the base of my blended salad, I might cut them into quarters. It'll just get the tomatoes turned into liquid faster, and then everything else will drop down. The other thing I will say, Kaelash, is also too, depending on your specific use and needs, may depend on which vacuum blending solution you get. So, for example, if you want to make vacuum blended juices, I would recommend the Tri-Best carafe or something like the New Wave carafe. That's nice, wide, and fat, so this will be a lot easier to process things like, chopped up fine celery to do 100% celery juice, whereas this carafe is a lot more narrow at the base, and not going to be quite as good. Although if you have a Vitamix, this is basically your own only solution unless you buy, a different kind of blender. All right, Kaelash, so what is tip number 6 for successful vacuum blending?
Number 6 is adjust your blending technique using the pulse function and also to ramp up slowly. So, well, your blender may not have a pulse function. These two do, so you can just push it down here and let go. That's basically how you pulse blend. Or you can turn it off and on if your blender doesn't have a pulse of the function. And so basically, I would start at a 4 or 5, so not all the way to the, you don't want to put it all the way up. Start maybe in the middle or a little bit lower, and then pulse blend until you see that things are moving, and then turn your blender on. And again, I would not start at the highest speed. Start maybe at a lower speed and keep going up. If often, in my experience, if you blend at the highest speed, everything gets like pushed up and it creates like an air bubble. And then you have to turn it off, and we'll talk about that in the next tip, what you may have to do.
How to deal with it.
How to deal with that. And so, in general also, I recommend, and this can save you a lot of cleaning, is to ramp it up slowly. If you start at the highest speed, everything kind of splashes up and then sticks to the lid of the blender, and this, especially with the vacuum blenders, it's a little harder to clean the lid, and this one has the pump built in. So start at a slower speed, increase the speed gradually, and then let it run. And as soon as you see that the surface stops moving, turn it off, because you're just over blending what's at the bottom and not blending enough what's on top.
Yeah, I agree, especially if you want to do vacuum juicing. So like you could use straight celery in a vacuum blender. You need to cut it small, then you should pulse to get the celery at the bottom turned into a liquid. Once enough of the celery at the bottom is turned into liquid, you can basically then do a slow ramp up, so that the celery on top basically falls into the liquid celery in the bottom and then gets turned into more liquid. So you'll have a celery mash that then you could pour through a Lexus bag and squeeze out. Link down below to my video on how to vacuum juice the celery. So Kaelash, what is tip number 7? Should you, create an air pocket, and how do we both actually deal with this, which maybe you've never heard before?
Yes, so there's a couple of things you can do when it's not blending, when you see it's kind of stuck, or maybe just the bottom layer is blending. One is stop your blender, make sure it stops spinning, take it off, and shake it a little bit, move it a little bit, and you often see.
Come on, get down! I shake it, I tap it. I'm aggressive, man.
And the other thing you could do, well, some people do. This is more dangerous. We don't necessarily recommend that you do that, but sometimes we do. We kind of move the whole
Yeah,
blender.
that could be dangerous because
Yes.
what could happen is if this comes out, it'll go and then make a screeching noise, and then it could actually do damage to your blender. So we definitely don't recommend that. If you do end up doing it, you want to make sure you hold this down, but it's just better to take it off and tap it. Let's be safe.
Yes. Yes.
Because this also can be voiding your warranty by moving it like this, like we do. Do as we say, not as we do. All right, Kaelash, so what is tip number 8?
Tip number 8 is to adjust the recipe. So in some cases, you just need to add more liquidy foods or add more liquid to the recipe for these blenders to blend the food properly.
Yeah, that's a very important one because a lot of traditional recipes may be designed for Vitamix where actually you have to use the tamper. So especially if the recipe says use the tamper in the Vitamix, then you know that recipe won't exactly translate into a vacuum blender. Maybe you could try all the techniques, layer it properly, pre-cut everything as small, and it still might not work. So then you would just want to go ahead and then add in after the fact some additional liquids, or even just add like watery fruits or vegetables. Celery works good, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, zucchini could work also. Some really watery fruits or vegetables, apples, even, or I've used oranges a lot. Oranges are a really easy one because or tangerines instantly turn into a liquid. Even something like papayas could work as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So an example would be I used to make the ice cream with these blenders using the tamper, just frozen bananas.
Vitamix, yeah, of course, make the nice cream.
And then with the vacuum blender, you can't just throw
bananas in there.
Frozen bananas.
You have no tamper.
So I add a little bit of papaya, very smallly cut papaya and then the bananas on top, and then salt the beef.
Oh,
and it even tasted better, you know?
Wow, so I got to get you in a demo doing that because I want to experience that, because a lot of people ask me, how do you make vacuum? Because that would be actually the best way to make a fruit sorbet, because you're doing it under vacuum without the oxygen, because bananas have the polyphenol oxidase days, and it actually will turn brown fast. So this will basically fluff it up without the oxygen, which basically every other solution for making ice cream will do. So like food processors whip it up like crazy. A traditional blender with a stick will whip it up. Even a champion juicer will whip it up. A slow juicer won't whip it up, but then you have a more hard pack, so you could still maintain that fluffy texture while having vacuum. So yeah, definitely got to see that, Kaelash.
We'll make that.
All right, Kaelash, so what is tip number 9 for successful vacuum blending?
Tip number 9 is to check the gasket periodically. Let me take that off here. So this gasket, it actually comes off. I don't want to take it off now because it's in a perfect place, and I don't want it to lose its, what do you call it, elasticity or tightness. And so basically, sometimes, in fact, when you put it in, let me put this here. Sometimes when you push it down, this is a pretty new one, but sometimes it kind of comes up and then it doesn't seal properly. And so what's recommended is that you check it. You can just check
the gasket to make sure it's all in place, and it's not like there's no leaves impeding the gasket, because if you have a leak, you will not be vacuum blending.
You can check it visually, and then also after a while, I would recommend taking it off and cleaning it properly, and also cleaning the lid where the gasket goes. Cleaning
the inside of the gasket, and also the mating surface where it adjoins the lid. Because if little particles get in there, that could also prevent you from maintaining a vacuum. Same thing on the void systems lid. This has been designed easily to come off, so you could easily clean inside here and then clean this gasket as well. I have noticed that sometimes things get in there and then it doesn't seal as well. Also on the void systems, actually, you also want to seal this plug right here. So you want to lift up this plug, clean this plug, make sure there's no like liquids or any kind of like food particles in here. Because if this doesn't seal properly against the base, and this gasket doesn't seal, then it won't be having a good vacuum seal. So yeah, be mindful of the gaskets on vacuum blenders, because before, on traditional blenders, you never had to deal with them before or worry if they're totally perfect and in place. All right, Kaelash, that brings us to the last tip on successful vacuum blending. What is tip number 10 for all the viewers that are still hanging out?
So that'll depend on the type of vacuum blender you have. Like this one here, for example, the pump is decent, and so after the initial blending, you might want to stop the blender before you've finished blending the whole food that's in there, and then re-pump again, stopping the blender and then starting just the pump, taking out the
vacuum
oxygen.
mode only.
Just the vacuum mode. Whereas this one, it keeps pumping when
you're blending.
When the pressure goes down, that is when oxygen comes in, the pump, these two pumps that are in there, they will keep taking out the oxygen.
Yeah, so this blender basically keeps a lower oxygen percentage in there during your blend, automatically actually, which some people don't like because it also will suck your smoothie through if you filled it too much because you're not listening to Kaelash other tips. Whereas this one just pulls a vacuum at the beginning, and then it may lose a little bit of vacuum or maybe more air may get in there due to when you're blending up your food. So you might want to just blend it a little bit and then basically re-vacuum it out. I mean, sometimes when I'm using this style blender, I'll basically vacuum it once and then I'll actually turn it off, turn it back on, and then vacuum again. It should just vacuum for a short period of time, letting you know that it actually has a full vacuum on it, and then I'll commence blending. Then sometimes I'll then blend a little bit and then stop and then re-vacuum. Now, these are all extra tips, but, we want you to have the best experience and also maintain the most nutrition so that your body and your families, can benefit the most from the most nutrition, most tastiest food with better flavors and less oxidation and less gas and bloating, because now you're not swallowing all the air.
And that'll last you longer, too.
That'll last you longer when you store it. So actually, if you guys want to learn all about the benefits of vacuum blending that we didn't cover in this episode, we'll put a link down below to the video that I made with Kaelash where we go over all the benefits of vacuum blending, where we go into a lot more of that in detail. This video, we just wanted to share the blending master expert tips with you guys so that you guys could vacuum blend successfully, should you buy a vacuum blender, or should you already own one? So Kaelash, any final thoughts or words of wisdom you'd like to share with my viewers today?
Well, I hope that if you're not vacuum blending already, that you will start vacuum blending. And then if you are already vacuum blending, that you learn something from this video that will make a difference in your life and hopefully inspire you to eat more healthy vacuum blended food, be it blended salads or blended smoothies or vacuum juices. So I hope this was useful for you.
Wonderful. And you know, I'll tell you guys, a lot of the tips that I learned myself, I learned from you. So if you have any vacuum blending tips that we did not mention, hey, post it down below underneath this video so that all can benefit from your tips, and maybe we'll start including those in our upcoming episodes and our techniques in our arsenal so that we can all vacuum blend together successfully. And because you guys stayed to the end of this episode, Kaelash has a special gift for you. So Kaelash, what are you going to give to everybody that stayed to the end of this episode?
12 meal replacement vacuum recipe with an ebook with 12 recipes that I put together, and I'm very excited to sharing that with you.
Wonderful. So all you guys got to do is click the link down below and enter your email address, and you'll get that email from Kaelash with his ebook. But also, more importantly, you're going to learn about his vacuum blending course and class he has, as well as his Vital Influence portal, where he shares a lot more with you about eating healthy, but more importantly, living healthy as well. So if you guys are interested in buying either the one of these vacuum blenders, put the links down below. Go to the Amazon shop to get the New Wave and to get the Void Systems kit for the Blend Tech, the Vitamix, or its own Void Systems blender with the carafe and lid. You want to use the coupon code DJ25 at voidsystems.com to save $25 off to get it for the lowest price. And of course, when you guys use that coupon code, not only will you save $25, but also Void will share with me a small commission so I can continue to make these educational videos for you guys to educate the world about vacuum blending and processing your foods in the best ways possible to retain the most nutrition so you get the most health benefits. So I want to thank you guys in advance who will use that code, which continues to support me so I can continue my important work. Now, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. Also, be sure to share this video with other people that want to learn more about refining and improving their vacuum blending skills. Also, be sure to click that subscribe button right down below so you don't miss my new upcoming episodes that I'm coming out every 5 to 7 days. You never know if show up or what you'll be learning on my YouTube channel, what new juicer unboxings or even vacuum blender comparisons, or what new knowledge bombs I'll be dropping on you. And make sure you click the bell to get notified as my videos come out, because I got a couple cool new videos coming out with Kaelash, hopefully really soon. Also, be sure to check my past episodes. The past episodes are a wealth of knowledge. Over 700 episodes at this time on this channel dedicated to teach you guys all about the best appliances to process your fruits and vegetables in the best ways. I'll put a couple of my favorite videos where I use vacuum blenders and share more about them with you down below in the description as well as the comments. So with that, my name is John Kohler with DiscountJuicers.com. Be sure to visit DiscountJuicers.com/YouTube for special promotional offers for YouTube visitors.